Ever since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade last summer, the left has thrown a temper tantrum now that they can no longer bank on activist judges to do their bidding. The left for years relied upon the courts to enact their policies. Well, these attacks on the Supreme Court continue. And in fact, Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee responded to trumped-up media reports against conservative Supreme Court justices by pushing so-called ethics reforms. Now, this is for the courts, and so today, by a party-line vote, they passed out these new guidelines, which they say are designed to improve and strengthen the court. But Republicans don't agree. Joining me now to discuss this is South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham. He serves on 4 Senate committees, including the Senate Judiciary Committee, where he is the ranking member. He joins us by phone. Senator Graham, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. They're at it again.
Well, let's talk about this. What's the motivation here? I mean, why all of a sudden do they have an interest in ethics for the court?
Trying to marginalize a conservative court they hate and demonize. Remember when Senator Schumer went to the steps of the Supreme Court?
Yes.
Called out Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, Justice Gorsuch Kavanaugh by name. The whirlwind will come after you if you overturn Roe v. Wade. They made a concerted effort to destroy Clarence Thomas's life from the time he had a hearing up until now. The Supreme Court has been constitutionally sound. They overruled Roe v. Wade in the Dobbs decision. They said race-based affirmative action violates the Constitution. It's driving the liberals crazy. This is not an effort to impose ethics on the court. This is an effort to marginalize the conservative members of the court. This is patently unconstitutional. The Supreme Court was created by the Constitution itself. All lower courts were created by statute. The Constitution created the Supreme Court as a separate branch of government. This bill would create a complaint system to the public at large. Any complaint filed against a Supreme Court justice would be adjudicated by lower court judges, a random panel of 5, and you'd be answering to the people that you oversee. Can you imagine the complaints that would come from the hard left? They're trying to create recusal, which means you can't hear the case standards that would allow most conservative judges to be knocked out. If Focus on the Family or anybody else wanted to file an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief, this bill would require all your donors be disclosed if over $100,000, which would chill out free speech. So this is an effort to marginalize the court, to restrict participation by conservatives, open up the court to just endless complaints, and I think it's patently unconstitutional, and it will go nowhere on the floor of the Senate.
A couple of questions here. One, early on, after the conservative majority emerged on the court, we saw this push for court packing, which didn't go anywhere. The public was against it. It couldn't move. So now we see this approach of ethics. But if this were challenged, which you say it's blatantly unconstitutional, would it not have to go to the Supreme Court?
It's funny you say that. Yeah, I mean, under our Constitution, you know what makes us different than a lot of countries? You know, the Soviet Union had in their Constitution a Bill of Rights that would be, you know, that we would all love, you know, to see. Words don't matter if you don't have a place to enforce the law.
Right.
An independent judiciary keeps us all free and safe. It's a check on legislative power. It's a check on the President of the United States. I don't always agree with the court, but at least I've got a chance to challenge those in charge of my government in a court of law. An independent judiciary is the heart and soul of a functioning democracy. This conservative court, it took us 50 years. There are people listening to your show today that have been working in the vineyards to get Republican majorities, Republican presidents, to put a conservative court together. It took us 50 years, but here we are. And Democrats are literally trying to destroy the court we created lawfully by packing the court. Now they're trying to create ethics reforms that would marginalize the court. So remember what happened to Kavanaugh?
Right.
there is no boundaries. There are no
Right.
guardrails. There's no limits to what liberals will do to destroy conservative justice. I've been on the front lines of this fight for 20 years. It's back again, and we're going to kill this bill on the floor of the Senate. There's not 60 votes for this bill, and it just saddens me that this never-ending effort to destroy the Supreme Court seems to have no limits.
Well, never ending is the key word here, because they'll come back with something else as the outside groups, these George Soros types groups that have been funded to track the court, writing these hit pieces on Justice Thomas and Alito. In part, is this not just to make any conservative who reveres the Constitution and would uphold the Constitution want to stay miles away from the Supreme Court and never want to be nominated?
I think, Tony, I hope people listen to what you just said. Why was Kavanaugh so important? He was a highly qualified man. I think he's led a very good life. He's incredibly qualified. I understand why he was chosen. I don't always agree with him, but he certainly was a sound choice. Look what happened to him. Remember the hearings?
Yes,
they were
I do.
talking about a party in high school that nobody could remember. They couldn't tell us when it happened and where it happened, but they were willing to believe just the most tenuous accusations. They had 3 people make up stories about Kavanaugh. None of them were prosecuted. The reason it was so important to get Brett on the court is if he had failed, who would come next? And that's what they're trying to do. Look what they tried to do to Clarence Thomas all of his, professional life. The rules are different. I mean, if you're a conservative woman, if you're a conservative minority, all hell breaks loose in your life. We got to defend these people. Yes, they're trying to chill the ascension of young conservatives, make it so that nobody would want to have these jobs. We can't let them get away with that.
You're absolutely right. This is essential to the rule of law, having those who understand the law, willing to uphold the law, and rule accordingly. Senator Lindsey Graham, always great to hear from you. Thanks so much for taking time today, and we'll be watching this closely, and we'll look forward to following back up with you.
Thanks, Tony.